Hey, I'm Helena, and this is Swisspreneur Summaries, where I take your favorite podcast episodes and compress them into snack-sized takeaways. Today's snack is episode 197 with Daniel Borel, co-founder and chairman emeritus at Logitech. Yes, you heard correctly, Logitech, the world's largest manufacturer of computer peripherals. Now, although I'm pretty sure all of us can remember owning a piece of Logitech equipment at one point or another, the massive scale of this company isn't even the most impressive thing about this episode, because Daniel was at the front lines of these monumental moments that have determined our technological evolution and have a large impact on the way entrepreneurship is today. As Daniel takes us through the 80s and meeting Bill Gates and refusing to sell to Apple when they offered to buy the company, you get this feeling that Daniel is this godfather of Swiss entrepreneurship. And I think when we think of Silicon Valley and the birth of entrepreneurship, I think we forget that there were people other than Americans there also leaving an impact. That Swiss founders have been such a crucial part of this change that we are now living today. And all of that combines to make a really great episode, which is very much a storytelling. So I've divided the summaries into 3 chapters: the mouse, Bill Gates, because you got a name drop, and growing pains. But first, an intro to Daniel. Let's go. Picture yourself in the 70s. Microsoft and the Apple computer have just been created, and the first microprocessors, operating systems, and developing languages are being born. Stanford is on fire, and the technological revolution is imminent. What do you do? Well, for Daniel, the answer was clear. After studying physics at EPFL, he went on to do his master's at Stanford, where he met Pierluigi, and they co-founded their first company together. They developed a word processing system, which later proved unsuccessful, but the connections that Daniel made at Stanford would certainly come in handy. Daniel moved back to Switzerland and in 1981 co-founded Logitech in his father-in-law's farm, which is kind of the Swiss equivalent of a garage. And soon, the first mouse was created. Most people will tell you develop hardware or software, but never do both. Well, Logitech was launching a product that was doing exactly that, because they believed that they could add the most value at this intersection of technology between hardware and software. Daniel claims that blurring the lines between the two, especially in the case of the mouse, is what ensured their survival in an extremely competitive environment. Their mouse was first developed as a prototype at EPFL, but they hit some roadblocks along the way, and the manufacturer was never able to get it just right. So they went back to the US and started knocking on some doors. After a series of events, they ended up at HP, who at the time was developing their first computer, and HP was really impressed with the technology. Fast forward through some really steep learning curves, a bit of luck, and the right technology, Logitech opened up a small manufacturing facility in Silicon Valley and began producing OEM for HP. Now you can imagine that at this time, on the cusp of this technological revolution, competition was really starting to pick up. And Daniel mentioned 2 stories that really stuck out to me. The first is, as this chapter alludes to, is the story of Daniel meeting Bill Gates at a beach party in 1982. At the party, they exchanged business cards, and Bill, just casually gonna say Bill, you know Bill. They exchanged business cards, and Bill told him who he should speak with at Microsoft. Soon after, they began in conversations with Microsoft and were basically selling to Microsoft on why they should buy from Logitech and not from their competitor. And not too long after those conversations started, they started to realize that the tips that they were giving Microsoft were going directly to that competitor. When Sylvan asks Daniel if they took any legal measures, which for I think many of us would probably be the knee-jerk reaction, Daniel simply laughs and says,
at the end of the day, competition keeps you honest and make you better. So,
So you had to move faster in that
and
regard.
we have to move faster, to run faster than your competitors, yeah.
Which I thought was a pretty cool-headed thing to say, that they were able to kind of step back and not be so reactive and focus internally on improving their own products. Second story is also about decision-making and not giving in to our reactions so easily. As they were starting to grow, it felt like to be really a certified leader for the mouse, they had to start producing for Apple, because Mac was the ultimate graphic computer at the time. So they went to Apple and showed them the technology, and Apple offered to buy Logitech because they thought they wouldn't be able to manufacture at the volumes they needed. Daniel and his team refused the offer because they believed in their potential and they saw the way the market was growing. Daniel claims that had it only been Apple around at the time, they might have considered the offer a little bit more. But since things were booming, holding their ground really paid off in the end, and eventually Apple did come back. Daniel credits much of Logitech's early success to the relatively immature market at the time that allowed them to start producing in smaller quantities and learn a lot in between and grow alongside the market. That said, many lessons came at a cost as Logitech aimed to invent the future. After the mouse, they moved on to ScanMan, a handheld scanner, and then AudioMan and PhotoMan, and the list goes on. And if you're like me, you're hearing a lot of these product names for the first time. Well, that's because none of them really became as successful as the mouse. So they wrote off a lot of inventory and refocused their energy on the mouse. Later on, a really big turning point happened with the launch of Windows 93 because it was the first real competitive offering against Mac, and that resulted in an explosion of volume demand for the mice. I don't even know, is like the plural of computer mouse still mice? It's so funny. And at the same time, Taiwanese competitors also entered the US market and began fighting with IBM and Compaq. And it's a very important turning point in the story because it completely restructured the personal computer business. PCs went from 5K to 2K. So a lot of these companies went broke, and it forced Logitech to cut their prices in half, quite literally overnight. So they quickly packed up their bags and moved their manufacturing to China. Because they did this so quickly and efficiently ahead of anyone else, that allowed them to stay competitive and kept them afloat during these really challenging times. To find out how they managed such an effective transition to manufacturing in China, check out the full episode on streaming platforms or at Swisspreneur.com. Between founding in 1981 and going public on the Swiss market in 1989, Logitech had only raised $600K in friends and family financing. Do you think something like this would still be possible today? And can you think of any startups that challenge that? Let us know in the comments below. And of course, tell us which episodes you'd like to see covered next. Until next time, dream big and never stop learning.